Good afternoon. Welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely EMET webinar. This is one that I am very, very excited to be able to conduct, and extraordinarily grateful to my dear friend Aykan Erdemir, who really helped with the arrangements of this. He's an old friend, and because of Aykan, I am making two new friends, Johnny Moore and Benham Ben Talabou. On the morning of August 13th last month, I was awoken to the pleasant surprise that a new peace accord had been struck between the UAE and Israel, the Abraham Accord. And it has brought to the forefront the flowering of some old or simmering relationships that have been developing under the table between Israel and some of the Gulf Sunni Arab nations. But unfortunately, it has also brought out the emergence of some new threats, particularly emanating from Turkey and from Iran. And some new alliances that they are fostering together. It's really ironic because Turkey and Iran had been the two regional powers, non-Arab Muslim nations that were first to establish relationships with Israel. Ankara in 1949 and Tehran in 1950. However, the enmity between Israel and the Sunni Muslim nations in the Gulf seems to be eroding gradually at about the same time that these new threats are emerging. So we are here today to discover the dynamics that are at play as we watch old adversaries becoming friends and old friends becoming adversaries. And to discuss what possible role Washington might be able to play to cement these relationships towards peace and to push back the reactionary forces. So we are delighted to have with us three phenomenal experts. Ben Talabou is a senior fellow at FGD, where he focuses on Iranian security and political issues. He previously served as a research fellow and senior Iran analyst at FGD, and he has also worked on non-proliferation issues at an arms control think tank in Washington. He has phenomenal expertise and native Farsi skills, and he has closely tracked what's going on the societal level in Iran. Johnny Moore is founder and CEO of the Kairos Company and president of the Congress of Christian Leaders. He is best known for his work at the intersection of faith and foreign policy, and is a president appointee as a commissioner for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. He has advocated relentlessly for religious freedom in the Middle East, meeting on multiple occasions with regional leaders, including most heads of state across the Arab world. And in 2017, he participated in the drafting of the landmark Bahrain Declaration on Religious Freedom and Peaceful Coexistence in the Middle East. Aykan Erdemir is the Senior Director of FGD's Turkey program and is a former member of the Turkish Parliament from 2011 to 2015. And thank God, his wonderful wife, Tupa, was prescient enough to make sure that they left Turkey as she saw Erdogan's rise to power. He served as the EU-Turkey Joint Parliamentary Committee, the EU Harmonization Committee, and the Ad Hoc Parliamentary Committee on the IT sector and the Internet. He's an outspoken defender of pluralism, minority rights, and religious freedoms in the Middle East. Aykan has been at the forefront of the struggle against religious persecution, hate crimes, and hate speech in Turkey. He is a founding member of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and a drafter of and signatory to the Oslo Charter for Freedom of Religious Belief, as well as a signatory legislator to the London Declaration on Combating Anti-Semitism. Okay, so we can't thank our three illustrious speakers enough. Beginning with you, Johnny, since you've had so much extensive experience in the Sunni Muslim and Arab world, had you seen this coming, and were you able to predict that something like this might have been in the works?
Well, I was off by a year, so I wrote an article. I was asked to give some predictions as to what would happen in 2019 for a religion news outlet. And I said, this will be the year that we'll see some type of normalization between another Arab country and the state of Israel. So I was off by a year. But the reason why I was confident in it is this particular peace accord, I would say, is a combination of two factors. The primary factor, and in my personal opinion, who gets the most credit for this is President Trump and the Trump administration for taking an unconventional approach to peace in the Middle East, and not beginning with the question of what can we not do, or what is off limits, or what are the taboo subjects we can't discuss, but just sort of starting with a baseline and saying, well, if we put aside all the preconceived notions and assumptions of the past 25 years in this case, since the last time we had something like this, like if we just started with a blank slate, and at the beginning was this fundamental conviction that in the end, Arab or Israeli, or whomever else in the region, ultimately everyone just wants peace and prosperity. They want a roof over their head. They want to be able to feed their families. They want to have optimism for the future. These are innate human characteristics. And so the Trump administration again and again was willing to take an unconventional approach and to work quietly and confidentially with virtually no leaks and all of these things. And so that's number one. And then number two was an entirely independent, incredibly robust, civilian to civilian, often religious leader to religious leader, or business person to business person engagement that has existed informally for a long time. I mean, this is a part of the world where in the UAE, I mean, how many Emiratis have been educated in the United States and Europe? There's this sort of strange phenomenon, as is the case with other countries in the region, where you met plenty of Jews and sometimes Israelis when you were being educated, when you were escaping the heat of the summer and going off to Europe or the United States. And yet, there was this alternative universe, that you entered back into when you entered into the Gulf, principally because of past grievances that are based upon real conflict. It's not to diminish the conflict. The conflict is real. The questions are important. And yet, there have been for years now, and it has accelerated in recent years, a real, in diplomatic speak, what you might call a track two type of engagement, though totally uncoordinated, entirely informal. And in my case, I'm an evangelical Christian, and there are minimum 650 million of us around the world. It's probably much larger than that. It's probably more like 800 million. It's this, in all likelihood, the second largest stream of Christianity in the world now. And as evangelicals, we're known to be friends of Israel. And it's interesting that when an Arab leader meets with an evangelical Christian, that's it's part of the discussion. It's the elephant in the room. We end up being sort of ad hoc intermediaries, and they sometimes get the same criticism for meeting with us as if they were to meet more in the open. And the same thing has been true of business leaders as it is of religious individuals or religious leaders. And so what I've noticed over the last couple of years is that there was a steady increase of deepening and growing relationships between various communities of religious leaders, communities of business people that tested the efficacy of some kind of formalized diplomatic engagement between the two countries, and normalization between the two countries. And frankly, extremism is what gave us this normalization, because it has created new alliances all around the world. And in the case of Christians, very often And we've been the intermediary between Arab Christians and Israelis, between Christians in the United States and Christians who are being persecuted in other parts of the world, where the United States has often provided assistance. And of course, as I'm sure my esteemed colleagues here will talk, a bit about the security and geopolitical questions in the region. There have been lots and lots and lots of reasons for these two countries to work together. I mean, from a business perspective, you have Silicon Valley in the Middle East, sitting there in Tel Aviv, and you have young people who are seeing a different world. They have different hopes and dreams. You have a region where technology and social media, for instance, has made it more difficult for leaders to monopolize a message and to propagandize their people in pursuit of their personal agenda. Right. And so people can have the freedom of having their own opinions, even if they're not living in democracies. And so there are lots and lots of things that went into this. But when it was all said and done, the track 2 efforts were inefficient. It had to take big leaders and big leadership. And in this case, whether you're on the political right or left, whether you're inclined or disinclined to support them for other reasons or not, it took courageous leadership from Benjamin Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Zayed and the president of the United States to say, we're going to take this leap and we're going to test this premise. And when it's all said and done, we don't have to be stuck on all the old questions. We can look for shared hope first and shared opportunity first. And I think that's what we're going to find. It's not that the Palestinian cause is going to be ignored. It's just that it's not going to have the to use a term that means something different perhaps these days. It's not going to have the trump card on the opportunity for every young Arab in the Middle East anymore. And in fact, perhaps this disposition towards thinking differently is the secret key that everyone has been looking for to unlock the door of peace for an entire region. And so I'm incredibly, incredibly optimistic, and my feeling is that this is the beginning, not the end.
Right. So before we hand the podium over to Behnam, you said you believe this is the beginning. Who's next? If you were to be a betting man, who would you put your money on?
The one thing I've learned about the Middle East is to not be a betting man. But look, I mean, I've lost track. First of all, yesterday you had, and this is not the Middle East, but you had, the representative from Chad and Israel. 2 days before that, you had the evangelical, who's now the president of Malawi, saying they were going to, open an embassy. You just saw something pop up in the press, everything from Somaliland to, of course, the Sudan, which is, and I don't know about any of this stuff, but the fact that there is so much talk about all of these countries is I think a key indication that these thoughts are being thought, and they once weren't even allowed to be thought. And look, it's a time of miracles we're living in. I mean, who would have ever imagined that, what's happening in the Sudan? I mean, a year and a half ago, no one would have ever imagined we would even be having these conversations, not about Israel, but about everything else, And so I think the momentum is in the right direction. And there are all these other positive things that are happening. I mean, don't underestimate the significance of airspace being opened, of economic opportunity in certain undeveloped parts of certain countries that are meant to be, places of tourism and points of meeting between business leaders and others. So I mean, there's lots of talk about Bahrain and Oman and the Sudan, and the list goes on and on and on. Ultimately, it does. These are complicated issues, and it does take a certain type of leader. But we'll see. And even if I did know something, I wouldn't say it. So you never know.
Excellent. Okay, Behnam, unfortunately, leaving from that optimistic note to one of the most depressing parts of the world, Iran. I know that the Iranian supreme leader said, of course, the UAE's betrayal will not last long, but the stigma will always be remembered. they allowed the Zionists to enter the region and forgot Palestine. The Emiratis will be disgraced forever. Tell us a bit about Iran and their next moves here. I know that the Iranians just purchased a new missile system that gives them an increased 1,000 kilometer range, and are they preparing for something horrific because of this?
Well, Sarah, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on this virtual panel, and to Johnny and Icon, thanks for sharing the digital space with me. We do need to pivot, of course, from the optimism Johnny injected into the conversation, most unfortunately, because we're dealing with not something that's kind of been fresh in the headlines, but long-standing grievances that are ideologically ingrained into the ruling elite, the religious elite, the military elite, the economic elite, and the political elite of the Islamic Republic. If you remember, revolutionary Iran, the founding father of that country, Ayatollah Khomeini, the first foreign guest, if you will, was Yasser Arafat. I know there was this great symbolism to Iran's reorientation in the region, going from friend of Israel to foe of Israel, and spending the next 4 decades. The Islamic Revolution has been around for 41 years. Spending the next 4 decades undoing much of the security architecture that had made Iran a defender of the status quo into an attacker of the status quo, meaning that it would work not with the countries in the region that were pro-American, that were pro-stability, that were pro-peace, that were pro-state-to-state relations, but that rather, Iranian time, Iranian money, Iranian effort would be spent cultivating, creating, co-opting people who were already living in the shadows, people who were already upset, trying to prey on the downtrodden and dispossessed, of which there's many, of any sect, any faith, any ethnicity across the entire Middle East. And that's really been Iran's, if we're going to borrow from Johnny's lexicon, trump card, not just into a region where it has significant impediments to its message. Iran is not exclusively, but primarily Persian. It's almost entirely, but not entirely Shiite. Out of all the Muslims in the country, there is a significant Sunni minority, and there's lots of other religious minorities that both John and Icon and you and most on this call or most on this video know are repressed and kind of kept down. But it is presented on paper as basically a Persian Shiite state. And so one of the first things Iran did to get over this was Ayatollah Khomeini's both ecumenical and strategic outreach, is to recast his message as an Islamist message, as a universalist message, to say this is not the Persian Shiite imperial power, this is really the defender of the downtrodden and dispossessed. And this has permitted Iran access not just into the Palestinian debate, where it has no legitimate geographic quarrel with Israel, but really into places like neighboring Afghanistan, Nigeria, Argentina, and Bosnia, places where it may or may not share linguistic, ethnic, political affiliation. And it's basically turning itself into a defender of the downtrodden and dispossessed, and trying to find places where there is this kind of revolutionary fervor, and inject itself as the guardian of that fervor, first through cultural institutions, religious outreach, and then, of course, military contacts. And that's how you get things like the blowing up of the AMIA Center in Buenos Aires. That's how you get things like Iran funneling weapons to defend Bosniaks during the Yugoslav wars. That's how you get things like from Iran first fighting the Taliban to working with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And that's how you get the proliferation of these centers, the Al-Mustafa University, across sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in South America, particularly in the tri-border area. So this has really been Iran's way of taking its ideological message and its strategic goal of penetrating regions where it has not had access to, and framing it to fit a particular context. And what Khamenei, the statement you read from Iran's current supreme leader Khamenei, what he was doing there is twofold. One, kind of staying this course, staying on the line of, oh, we're the defenders of the Palestinians, the rest of the Arabs who wish to normalize, they've forsaken the Palestinian cause. And the other is something a bit more closer to home that I think most may not realize, is that, Iran always fashioned itself as the guardian of the Persian Gulf. It's the Persian Gulf, after all. It's trying to make sure that it is the predominant power in the region. But really, since the 1979 for the US, for US foreign policy in the region, we've had this thing called the Carter Doctrine, which is that we would not let one country become the hegemon. And because of this tension between US policy and Iranian policy, the US has been drawn in further and further in the region. The creation of CENTCOM, the formation of free trade agreements and business and military ties and military bases of the US. The US has deepened its footprint in the Persian Gulf region, particularly with the Arab states. And this has kind of created this cold peace, lots of proxy conflict, ways that the Iranians try to exploit it by working, with their terror proxies to occasionally attack, as we saw last summer, tankers. And their goal is to basically get these Gulf Arab countries to hedge, right? The Gulf Arab countries know they live in a dangerous region. Historically, they have always hedged. This is, as Johnny was saying, this was a big gamble. This took big leadership. And, it's no doubt that the Emiratis were not ever really shy on the political stage. They went for this move big time politically. And now Iran wants to make them pay the price politically. And Iran is betting that it can spook the Emiratis. And unfortunately, the reason I have to inject some pessimism here is that while most of the Gulf were supporters of this max pressure campaign, the Trump administration's political and economic policy to bring Iran back to the table, they also know they live in a dangerous neighborhood. And Iran has tried to get these countries to not become supporters of max pressure. And for a while, it looked like the Emiratis were going to be the first to be peeled off of this coalition. The Emiratis actually, when they saw the summer of escalation by Iran last time, the cruise missile strikes and the drones against Saudi Arabia, the downing of the American drone, and of course the attacking of the tankers near the Strait of Hormuz. It was Emiratis that actually began a maritime security dialogue with Iran, the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. It was the Emiratis which were the first country to withdraw troops formally from Yemen, where Iran is supporting politically and militarily the Houthis, the rebels in that country. So there were all these small adjustments. And then you saw a proliferation of articles in the mainstream American press about the fears Emiratis had about their country being the backyard for a war. You were quite salient to mention missiles. Iran didn't purchase systems, as far as I know, but they unveiled 2 new systems in August, one of which had this sufficient range to basically reach the Levant area, to reach perhaps different portions of Israel. While that's new, Iran has already had an entire class of missiles, medium-range ballistic missiles, all of which are nuclear capable, which the Persian press styles, if you look at the infographics that they put out, as Israel hitting missiles. They're telling you where the intention is here. But even the shorter range things that the Iranians have, which are actually more accurate and have been on display really since 2017, all of those systems can target any place on the Arab side of the Persian Gulf, and the Emiratis know that. And so you saw a proliferation of statements, including by Khamenei, after talking about Emirati security being akin to a glass house. And this is a continuation of not just the Iranians trying to say they are the champions of the Palestinian cause, trying to get over this Persian and Shiite impediment for their narrative in the region to take hold, but also really to stay the course on this issue. And last summer, we're in the month of, last September, because we're in the month of September, the UNGA happens in New York every September. Rouhani went and he said one key phrase in Arabic for the rest of his speech, which was delivered in Persian. And it was designed to continue this hedging policy. And the phrase he said was an old Arabic proverb, which is first the neighbor, then the house. Iran said to the Emiratis, basically said to the GCC states, actually, first the neighbor, then the house, meaning you're trying to protect your house and you've invited the Americans in, but you've ticked off your neighbor, basically us. And even Rouhani, who's falsely styled as a moderate in the Western press, was willing to kind of use this card to say, you keep inviting these guys in, we're going to double down, triple down on the kind of things that you don't like that we do. These proxy attacks, these threats against your homeland, the creating or cultivating of terror groups on your soil, passing missiles through your territory, that kind of thing. And this September will be Rouhani's last UNGA. And one wonders what he will say, as not just the Emiratis have invited the Americans in, but now the Emiratis are on record bringing in the Israelis and trying to fundamentally alter the region's security, political, and economic dynamics. Iran knows it's really in a minority position here increasingly, but it's really when these revolutionary regimes are in a corner when they're most dangerous.
Right, right. So who then do you believe are Iran's allies in regions besides what's left of Lebanon? Qatar, who has been funding, Hamas, Hezbollah, who are their real allies?
Well, if you look at it, things from a state perspective, as an Iranian American, I'll tell you that watching the way the Islamic Republic has done business, watching what has happened to the Iranian state, is that the Islamic Republic is a poor guardian of the Iranian national interest. It has done great injustice to Iranians. It has failed to live up to not only its own revolutionary expectations about helping the oppressed at home, but really it's gone around oppressing other people abroad. And in so doing, as it became a revolutionary state, it forsook a lot of the old ties. And Iran and Israel, if you look at things from a state perspective, actually have a lot more in common with one another. In fact, it's because of Iran's revolutionary course that you see Arab-Israeli peace forming. One need not forget, there was a famous, I think, Robert Kaplan article in The Atlantic from the summer 2010, where, Henry Kissinger was just spouting off options for the US to kind of check Iran. And he said, one thing, maybe Sunni Arab, I'm paraphrasing him, Sunni Arab peace with the Israelis as a counterweight against Iran. And that was 10 years ago. And lo and behold, that actually happened. I'm not saying Johnny's predictions are younger or older than Henry Kissinger's, but it's something that people have talked about for a while. So today, the kind of allies or partners Iran has are proxies, really entities that it created, it co-opts, or it controls. And it has very few state-level allies. It has the Assad regime, because Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, was one of the few Arab states who stood with Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. The 40th anniversary is actually this month of that war. And other than that, it's Hezbollah. It's a proxy that Iran created. Tons of Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, which either Iran created or co-opts, but now controls. The Afghan and Pakistani Shiite brigades that Iran has created that fight in Syria, as well as the Houthis, which are not formally a proxy, but they're more a partner. Iran is trying to co-opt them. The longer the war goes on in the Arabian Peninsula, the more they become wedded to Iran and reliant on Iran for weaponry and these kind of things. So Iran is trying to take a grassroots approach. It sees the states are allied against it, so it's going to try to co-opt the populations. And there was a while when some of the populations circa the 2006 war with Israel were receptive to Iran's revolutionary message. But the Arab Spring, Iran's own crushing of its green movement in 2009, and the Syrian civil war had really shown the kind of actor that Iran is in the region. And no Arab public is going to go for that.
Right. And I'd actually, before we turn to ICON, I'd ask everybody to read the Human Rights Watch report about what happened to the demonstrators, the 7,000 demonstrators that were detained by the Islamic Republic of Iran, arrested, tortured, held, without trial, some executed. It's really horrific, and we really should not forget this valiant struggle of the people on the streets. ICON, of course, Turkish leader, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that history will never forgive the UAE's hypocritical behavior. And Erdogan, I think, has been emerging, aside from Iran, as one of Israel's and, ironically, the United States' biggest threats, despite the fact that it's a NATO ally, supposed ally. So will you explain a little bit about what's going on with Turkey and who Turkey is reaching out to form new alliances and how they've responded to this deal?
Thank you, Sarah, for the kind invitation to be able to speak alongside this great lineup of speakers. So if Johnny's message is one about optimism, if Behnam's is one of pessimism, I guess mine is disappointment, because Turkey was the first Muslim majority country in the world as early as 1949 to recognize Israel, to establish diplomatic relations, and not just stay there, and then build layers and layers of win-win relationships with Israel. Diplomatic, to economic, to military, to intelligence. So I think Turkish-Israeli relations for decades demonstrated how Muslim majority nations could establish win-win relationships with Israel, and that there would be dividends for all involved. Now, that began to change with the rise of Erdogan's Islamist-rooted Justice and Development Party to power in 2002. And it took Erdogan some time to consolidate his rule and to, let's say, push the opposition or marginalize the opposition to such an extent that he finally had free reign over Turkey's foreign and security affairs. So, you know, Erdogan has been in power for nearly 18 years, but I would argue that it's only within the last decade that we have seen a more radical transformation of Turkey's foreign and security policy stance. And that, of course, involved a greater pushback against Israel, attempts to delegitimize it, support for Hamas, closer coordination with Iran. For example, for those in the audience who might have missed this, the elephant in the room, Turkey, through its second largest public lender, Halkbank, was at the forefront of Tehran's evasion of US sanctions. So this is possibly the largest ever sanctions evasion scheme in the world. And of all the countries in the world, it was NATO member Turkey. It was Turkish government basically coaching, facilitating Iran's ringleader to evade sanctions. And this happened, at the height of the Syrian civil war. So just to, again, emphasize how hypocritical the Erdogan regime is, while Erdogan was shedding crocodile tears over the civilians and the children and the women killed by the Assad regime, he was basically financing the key patron of the Assad regime, namely, the Islamic Republic, through the sanction evasion scheme. But that, I think, even this story and this trajectory shows us that things are extremely complicated in the Middle East and also extremely fluid, that we shouldn't really take existing patterns for granted, and they're prone to change. Turkey remains a member of NATO. Turkey remains a member of the Council of Europe, and Turkey remains a candidate country for European Union membership. And Turkey remains one of the hosts of the number of US bases in the region. But at the same time, as recently as last month, Turkish President Erdogan hosted 2 senior Hamas leaders who are on the US's, global terrorists designation list. And Turkey continues to be at the forefront of the pushback against not only the Israel-UAE deal, but any subsequent peace deal which might follow. And what makes it more shocking is the discourse, the rhetoric used by Turkish officials was a one-to-one match to the one coming from Tehran. The same lexicon: betrayal, hypocrisy. And when this comes from Iran, it's not a surprise. In fact, it might not even be a cause for pessimism because it's expected. But when it comes from, NATO member and a longtime ally of also Israel, Turkey, then it's disappointing to say the least. And it's not just a disappointment about where Turkey is headed, but it's also a disappointment about the region as well. Because Turkey has been and could still be a beacon about the separation of mosque and state, about how to combine, a Muslim majority nation with a free market economy, with membership in, Western-led, liberal, Western-led international organizations, a net contributor to peace. Turkish military was at the forefront of, various missions from Bosnia to Afghanistan to Somalia. So here was a net security contributor, Turkey, which could have been a beacon of expanding peaceful and win-win relationships in the Middle East, turning into on the one hand, a sectarian power, pursuing a Muslim brotherhood, ideology and a set of goals in the broader Middle East. But on the other hand, transcending sectarianism and managing to find common ground with the key Shiite patron in the region, and that is Iran. And that, of course, is puzzling and continues to puzzle many analysts, even here in DC to this day. You know, there is still a school of thought, which I call, you know, a relic of maybe the Cold War era or maybe the 80s and 90s, that sees Turkey as a key counterweight to Iran and Russia. And yes, you know, for decades, Turkey was, you know, the bulwark of the transatlantic alliance in NATO's southeast flank against Soviet Russia. And for centuries, you know, the Iranian empires, you know, from the Safavids onward, and, you know, various Turkish empires, named the Ottomans, were counterweight to one another. You know, there was some level of status quo, a balance of power in the region. But increasingly, we see Iran and Turkey, while maintaining certain sectarian differences, while being on different pages concerning the civil war in Syria, increasingly find ways to cooperate, whether it's sanctions evasion, whether it's joining forces to go after Iraqi Kurdistan and its independence referendum, and whether it's to push back against the UAE and Israel deal. So this is what we call compartmentalization, that Iran and Turkey, despite having historically clashing interests on a number of fronts, under Erdogan's leadership and the clerical regime in Iran, find Islamist common ground to challenge, you know, the Western-led international order in the region. Now, similar to Iran, this relationship is not just a state-to-state relationship. Erdogan has been imitating Iran to a great extent. There has been a massive outreach to non-state actors, you know, listed and illicit. For example, Turkey is increasingly coordinating, you know, with Hamas, some ties with Hezbollah, working very closely with the Muslim Brotherhood, employing Syrian jihadists, not just in Syria, but now airlifting them also to Libya. So here we see a new Turkey, at Erdogan's Turkey emerging, in a way resonating with the Iranian tactics of working with non-state actors to pursue Islamist goals in the region. And I think this trend will continue to be there. Erdogan, as long as he remains in office, will dedicate Turkish national resources to advancing a global Muslim Brotherhood agenda. And again, echoing Behnam, I would like to say that in betrayal of Turkish national interests, Erdogan will be wasting Turkish resources, Turkish lives, Turkish institutional capacity to basically be a patron of extremism, Islamism, not be you know, a voice or a beacon of peace, but a voice for and, you know, a facilitator of these you know, extremist radical ideologies and agendas. And let me end with one final footnote, because it's not only Turkish-Iranian relations which are complicated, but also Turkish-Israeli relations too. So it's not just black or white, it's gray at, you know, at best. So for example, until the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, Turkish Airlines was the second largest airlines flying in and out of Tel Aviv. Or to this day, despite, you know, the lack of ambassadors, you know, in Israel and Turkey, Turkish economic relations with Israel are very robust. You know, Turkish construction firms continue to be at the forefront of building projects in Israel. And Israeli tourists, maybe they do not necessarily feel safe as they used to back in the days, but they still come to Turkey. They still see Turkish people as friends and Turkey as a desirable tourism destination. So it's very important to realize that Turkey is not Erdogan, although Turkey has been taken hostage by Erdogan, and that there can one day be a return back to the cordial relations I know it's ironic that Turkey, who could have been the leader in building peace, will have to be a follower in rebuilding peace. But it's important to remember Turkey is a divided society. Erdogan has less than 50% support together with the ultra-nationalists. Mm-hmm. And just as Erdogan was able to steer Turkey to a very destructive path in foreign and security policy, subsequent Turkish governments, and let me end with a note of peace to echo Johnny, subsequent Turkish governments could steer Turkey back to a kind of a pro-peace, win-win, constructive foreign and security policy that is more in line with decades and decades of Turkish Republican policy.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so well stated. When I was much younger, I looked at Turkey as this paradigm of a beautiful secular Muslim government. And although it's no longer a beautiful secular Muslim government, there are still many people within Turkey that are wonderful secular Muslims and are being held captive by this regime. So, so what has happened since the deal in terms of the relationship between Turkey and Iran? Has there been further melding of forces and further discussions between the two countries?
Very quickly, being mindful of the time, so we have time for Q&A. Just yesterday, there was a high-level cooperation meeting between Turkey and Iran. And this is one of these series of meetings. And there were, again, strong official discourse coming from both ends about cooperating on multiple fronts. And I think that trend will stay, that will continue. Turkey and Iran find increasingly common ground in pushing back against Syrian Kurds, Iraqi Kurds, Iranian Kurds, Turkish Kurds. So they are finding ways to cooperate. And just using this as an opportunity to reflect on one of the questions I see, and there are other actors joining them as well. Let's keep in mind that China has been very proactive both in Iran as well as in Turkey, to such an extent that Turkey has been silent on the horrible oppression of Uyghur Muslim minority in China, who share ethnic, linguistic, and religious affinity with Turkey's Turks. So if China is able to silence Turkey on a matter that is so dear to the average Turkish citizen's heart, then I think we should also start thinking beyond the bilateral relationship. That is, how will future Turkish-Iranian relationships will be shaped in a region where China has a growing footprint? So let me end with that question here.
And now it's my privilege to turn the podium over to our wonderful Director of Communications, Leia Thompson.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, of course, to all our panelists for joining us today and for taking the time, and for all of our audience members who have submitted questions. As usual, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of them, but we'll do the best that we can. So the first question we have, and whoever feels that they want to take a stab at answering it, feel free to maybe give a little wave and we'll go from there. So the first question, how do you see Turkey in the near term being tempted to become more aggressive in asserting hegemony over Syria and Lebanon?
So that's a difficult question, but in a nutshell, let's expand the scope to the Eastern Mediterranean. So from Libya, all the way to Syria, we see Turkey posturing more belligerently and at times irredentously, as we see, for example, Turkey's gunboat diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean. We see Turkey's proxy fighters, not only in Syria, but also in Libya. We see Turkish military incursions into Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan. This is all a reflection of what the Turkish government calls a more assertive foreign policy, but what the region's state and non-state actors perceive as kind of a more belligerent, more irredentist Turkish foreign and security policy. I think this is a trend on the rise, so we will see more of this. We will see more gunboat diplomacy. We will see more Turkish deployment of both military as well as proxy forces that complements Erdogan's kind of proactive, Islamist agenda in the Eastern Mediterranean as well as the Middle East at large.
All right, great. So we can move on to the next question. Thank you. Would you, whoever feels that they would like to step in, would you be able to address the developing relations between Iran and China?
Sure, Sarah, I could hop in and take that if you want. Basically, Iran and China have had long-standing ties, both prior to and after the revolution, of course. But after the revolution, when we talked about this whole new orientation for the Islamic Republic, the founding motto of the Islamic Republic is neither East, which is a reference to communism, nor West, a reference to capitalism, and Islamic Republic. In Persian, it actually rhymes when you say neither East nor West and Islamic Republic. Despite this slogan, 41 years of the Islamic Republic's foreign and security policy, its dogged anti-Westernism, anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israel sentiments have pushed it willingly and unwillingly closer to the Russian and Chinese autocracies, particularly the Chinese, because China, after the 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq War, played a key role in the development and basically reverse engineering of select armaments that basically in the 1990s, Iran used to grow its own domestic arms industry. It's basically a whole series of Chinese anti-ship systems that Iran rebuilt now at home and has been able to, in some cases, export abroad. In fact, the one punch Lebanese Hezbollah landed against the Israelis in 2006 with the missile being fired at the INS Hanit, if I'm not mistaken, it was an anti-ship cruise missile that Iran had gotten from China and first engineered. It was the C-802 anti-ship cruise missile. So this is really the train here. They get the technology from China, they produce it again at home, they re-engineer it at home, reverse engineer it at home, and then they export it to their proxies abroad. So there's a real train here. So that's the military component. The nuclear component is, of course, well known. China is not only a participant in the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, it has, pursuant to this deal, it's quote unquote remodernizing one of Iran's reactors, the Arak reactor, despite the US leaving the deal, but also the economic component. Prior to sanctions against Iranian oil, both under Obama and Trump, and both licitly and illicitly, China was and remains the largest importer of Iranian oil. So much so that even when the Trump administration, and this is a statistic true from 2011, when you had those tough oil sanctions phase in, all the way until present. And so much so that in 2020, when the Trump administration was tightening its existing oil sanctions, it had to take into account oil that was in storage, because this is a gray zone in US sanctions law, because China was simply taking these shipments of oil and not processing it through customs to avoid this sanctions loophole. So in essence, China is economically enmeshed in Iran, militarily a source of weapons, and if this arms embargo expires in October 2020, it'll again add more conventional weaponry and more conventional capability to Iran. And on the nuclear front, of course, there's always been an outstanding question to how deep these ties really run. Despite this, it's not an alliance. It's really a partnership where China, and also in terms of Russia, have clearly the upper hand against the Islamic Republic. And these two countries, when we talked about this new phenomenon called great power competition, instrumentally use Iran. They instrumentally and selectively empower Iran to flare up a certain issue, to take away Western attention, and to basically force America or another state to focus on this new Iranian threat or this new measure, rather than pushing back on China or pushing back on Russia. So it's a long-standing partnership. It's definitely slanted more towards China. I intentionally did not mention that China-Iran trade deal for 25 years because it's been a bit hyperbolized in the press, but there are these nuclear, military, and economic relations, and those will continue in the short to medium term.
Great, thank you so much. For our next question, and perhaps Johnny, if you would like to speak to this, If Biden is elected, do you believe that this would slow down, accelerate, or have no impact whatsoever on the move of Arab and Muslim states to recognize Israel?
Well, I just want to add something to what Benim was saying, and then I'll answer that. Let's just be clear, and the Iranian people ought to understand, China is exploiting what's left of Iran's resources for whatever it can get, exclusively for its own benefit. And this is just a grand exercise in regime preservation at all costs. And it really, I feel very, very sorry for the Iranian people once again over this. In terms of Biden, look, I mean, one thing is clear. Biden is surrounded by foreign policy advisors who played a significant part in the JCPOA, who had significant convictions related to the JCPOA, and have every intention of engaging in another Iranian agreement, not dissimilar from the JCPOA. Okay, I mean that's just clear. And my impression is that the phenomenon that we're seeing in the region, okay, is in response to bad foreign policy, and this is just my personal opinion, certainly not the opinion of you, and I'm not sure the opinion of the other people here, but despite being heralded, as an expert in foreign policy, when it comes to the Middle East, Vice President Biden in this campaign has a lot of questions he has yet to answer, and I think they're questions that he perhaps doesn't want to answer. And a key thing that he could do, if he wanted to answer some of those questions, is he could immediately support the snapback of sanctions against Iran. If he wanted to indicate that he was going to have a stronger stance, I mean, there are these types of things that could be done, these types of statements that could be made. Biden has made it clear that he has no intention of moving the embassy out of Jerusalem now that it's in Jerusalem. That's an improvement, because when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, Biden was one of the most prominent critics against it and said the whole thing was going to blow up, right? And it didn't blow up. And in fact, this actually was largely the precipitating circumstance for a lot of these things, because I think a lot of Arab leaders, always concerned about what's going to happen on the streets, expected the streets to blow up, and the streets didn't blow up, even in Egypt. And this was all very, very indicative of sort of the conventional wisdom when it comes to these very, very big questions. So would this process continue? I hope so. I think there are a lot of people. Certainly, the UAE and Israel are going to go back on the process. Would the region continue? I mean, I think Biden's got to give some real clarity on where his administration's relationship with Iran would be. I mean, at the Democratic Convention, the way the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, spoke about the Iranian deal and the Iranian regime. I mean, all of these are very, very big and important questions. And it's one thing to pursue peace. Okay. President Trump has made it clear, he'd be more than happy to have an Iran deal, just an Iran deal that made sense. As it relates to U.S. foreign policy, and it would include things like you have to stop yelling "death to Israel" and "death to America" in the streets, and stop your activities all across the region. So I actually think Vice President Biden has a real opportunity to sort of stand against his foreign policy advisors and make clear what his actual opinion is. But till now, he's refused to answer those questions. It's a big problem for him going into November, at least for my community. And I imagine for others.
Thank you so much. I think we might have time for one or two more questions. And on a similar note, we received a question that was submitted specifically for ICON. It says, understanding the US election could change the relationships in the Middle East. What do you think that the US relations with Turkey is moving towards? Or where do you think?
Turkey's relations with the US remain very complicated. And I don't see this trend to change anytime soon. There are a number of big items on the agenda, and they're not going anywhere. The first one is the ongoing trial in the Southern District of New York against Turkey's second largest public lender, Halkbank, for its key role in helping Iran evade US sanctions. So why is that case important? Because ultimately a conviction and a subsequent fine could spark yet another chapter of conflict between the US and Turkey. The second big item is Turkey's purchase of Russian-made S-400 air defense system and the potential US sanctions, CAATSA sanctions against Turkey, which will be yet another crisis in bilateral relations. The third big issue remains, of course, US presence in Syria and Turkey's pushback concerning American cooperation with Syrian democratic forces, the main component of which happens to be Syrian Kurds. So on the Kurdish issue, there is a major disagreement between Washington and Ankara, and it's not going anywhere. And the last but not the least is, of course, the Eastern Med crisis, because for Washington, the hydrocarbon resources in the East Med is a great opportunity to build win-win relationships, whereby as part of the East Med gas forum, you see Israel and Jordan, Egypt, and other Cyprus and Greece coming together to build win-win commercial relations through these hydrocarbon resources. And Turkey happens to be the main challenger, not only to this cooperation, but to the existing maritime borders, to the existing exclusive economic zone delineations. Hence, this will also bring Turkey and US on a crash course concerning the future of the Eastern Mediterranean. So given that the bilateral agenda is full of these landmines, and I'm not going into any of the human rights and religious freedom issues, which are also there, but given these key disagreements are there and can flare up at any given time, I think regardless of the election results in the US, this relationship will remain rocky. And again, going back to my earlier statements, I think the only way out of this is for Turkish citizens to vote Erdogan out and to bring in, a secular, liberal, democratic, pro-Western government that goes back on track with decades of, secular Republican tradition in Turkey.
Okay, before we close up, I do want to ask you, Aykan, one further question. When are the next elections, and is there a chance of there being free and fair democratic elections in Turkey?
Quick answer, the elections are scheduled for 2023. They will combine parliamentary and presidential elections. So it will give the opposition an opportunity to vote both Erdogan and his Islamist party, Justice and Development Party, out of power. And last year's local elections showed that although the Turkish playing field is extremely unlevel and Erdogan controls 95% of the media and can outspend the entire opposition 100-fold, he can still lose, because as we speak, half of Turkey's population and 2/3 of the Turkish economy are being governed by opposition mayors, which shows that that election victory of 2019 can also be repeated in 2023. So I always say, as we watch Turkey with great concern, we never give up hope.
I thank you for that. We started with Johnny on an optimistic note, and we're actually ending with you, Aykan, on an optimistic note. There is hope, despite all of the obvious landmines in the Middle East. I can't thank this illustrious panel enough for their time and their collective wisdom. My board has told me that I must say that all of this costs us time and money, and if you can, to please support EMET. And of course, also, if you would like to please support FDD, where 2 of our scholars are from. We're very, very grateful for the partnership, the longstanding partnership we've had with Cliff May and John Schanzer and Icon and now Benham from FDD. And Johnny, is there some organization that you would like us to support?
I think those are two great organizations to support. So I'll leave
Thank you.
There.
Thank you so much. Please tune in next week where we'll be honored to have an old friend of mine, Ambassador Richard Shifter, who has an organization called Ajiri, where he is trying courageously for many, many years to try to overcome the voting bloc against Israel in the United Nations. And this should be timed for the opening of the next UN session in September. Anyway, thank you so much for all of our viewers for tuning in once again to a phenomenal webinar. And thank you, Icon, Johnny, and Vena. Take care of them.